So we've identified that many students in Oakland experience racially disproportionate discipline, lack access to care, are victims of or at times perpetrators of violence, and all of which have a significant impact on their capacity to graduate from high school. And in looking at the data around, in 3 areas, reading scores, particularly for our African American students, reading scores by 3rd grade, and then suspension rates and referrals to special education, we identify, and also, graduation rates, we identified that there's a trend that crosses all of those domains, and that is that for our African American students, they experience disproportionate rates of suspension, referral, and also incarceration. And so we believe that this particular group is not receiving an equitable education in comparison to other ethnic and racial groups in the district. And so we have dedicated and organized our services to bring equity for all students in OUSD. Well, there are several consequences that are significant in terms of academic achievement for students that are suspended multiple times. One of the most important is that they're out of the classroom during that time. And when we look at our suspension data, we see that suspensions beget suspensions. So the old adage that you suspend a student, they go home, the parents reinforce what the school rules are. They come back the next day prepared to behave according to the school rules. If that is going to work, it'll work on the 1st or 2nd time. But what we see is that if it hasn't worked on the 1st or 2nd time, what generally happens with students who receive multiple suspensions is that they receive additional suspensions. And the result is, 1, that they're out of school, but 2nd, that they begin to become disengaged with the school setting, and as do the parents. They begin to feel that there is a bias against them, at times a racial bias, and they begin to disengage with and actually become disenchanted with education in general. And this is caused by being pushed out of the classroom repeatedly for behaviors that may be actually adaptive within a community setting. So in OUSD, we've looked very carefully at best practices, national best practices for reducing racially disproportionate suspensions. And we've identified a couple of strategies that appear to be particularly advantageous, particularly for African American students. One of them is restorative justice. And restorative justice is a paradigm shift that changes our approach to discipline from identifying what rule was broken and what punishment should be given to what harm was caused and what reparation can we support the student to make so that they actually are more engaged in school after an incident than they would be by being pushed out. So restorative justice is one, and the other one that we've embraced is positive behavioral intervention and support, otherwise known as PBIS. And PBIS is designed to bring equity in terms of behavioral expectations and supports for all students school-wide, so that in Miss A's classroom, she tolerates you having a hat on, but Mr. B sends you to the office for wearing a hat. With PBIS, there are agreed upon behavioral expectations that cross all the domains in the school, and that the students participate in setting, so that there's buy-in from students, and then there's positive reinforcement and incentives for engaging in and following those behavioral expectations. So the shift is away from punishing students for not behaving properly according to our unstated expectations to reinforcing students for meeting our expectations, and when they can't, providing additional support to them as opposed to punishment.
Our efforts to reduce disproportionality in terms of student suspension really stemmed from a process that our staff, families, and members of our community engaged in terms of determining what is our vision at United for Success Academy, what is our mission, what is our purpose for existing as a school. And so we landed on our entire mission for existing here at United for Success is to interrupt the inequities that exist in our communities by ensuring that all of our students are academically and socially prepared for success in high school and beyond. And with that came a lot of reflection and dialogue about what are the inequities that prevail in our communities and where do we contribute as part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution. And so one of the areas of focus that we landed on was suspensions and how we determined who was suspended and our process that really mirrored the criminal justice system. And so when we reflected on that, we identified that we were only doing suspensions as a way of consequences because that's what we knew. So zero tolerance was what we had been told, we had been sold on that, and when we really stopped and reflected on what do we believe in, we realized that that's not what we believed in, and when we were introduced to the concepts of restorative justice, we identified that that was something that we as a school wanted to take on, and had been talking about it for a little bit and beginning to make some changes. But I think our process in engaging in our revisioning and identifying our mission really pushed us to the point where it was an intentional change with structures and systems in place to support it. And so our initial purpose was say, let's not suspend kids anymore, but we also realized that when you're transitioning to something different, people don't necessarily know what you're doing, and so there's a sense of you're letting kids get away with everything. And so we wanted to kind of give ourselves some time to transition to a place where where suspension isn't our go-to consequence or our go-to next step when a child commits a mistake or makes a mistake. So when you look at our suspension data in comparison from last year to this year, we have drastically reduced the number of, not only of number of days that students are missing, but also the number of offenses for which students are being suspended. Last year, for example, the number of days kids missed as a result of suspension was about over 350, and this year we're looking at about 180, which is still high, but it's a significant change from what we were doing in the past. And so this year, by simply doing what we committed to doing, which is we're not suspending for disruption or defiance, because we felt like we have the capacity to intervene and identify and talk to kids and help through with other restorative justice processes such as circles and engaging in dialogue with kids, that we weren't going to suspend for disrupting defiance, valid authority of school personnel, which I think often we abuse it when we aren't sure of what to do. And it's changed the concept of getting in trouble. So it's not, if you go tell somebody you're going to get in trouble. We haven't completely eliminated the middle school concept of snitching, but we've definitely seen an increase of students coming to different adults on campus asking for help, and I need to resolve this conflict, as opposed to taking it out in a violent way or setting up fights. So you definitely see a sense of an increase of students taking ownership of the school alike.